Hello, everyone, and welcome. For those of you who haven't seen me before, although you might have seen me just on the last panel a few minutes ago, my name is Scott Edinburgh. I'm the founder of Personal MBA Coach, boutique MBA and graduate school admissions consultancy and tutoring firm. I went to MIT for undergrad, worked a few years in consulting, and went to Wharton for my MBA. And we help applicants through all the parts of the application process, from brainstorming, early planning, story development, tutoring, essay editing, interview prep, and career advice. So happy to be joined by some fantastic alumni of really top schools. And I'll let everyone introduce themselves, and then we'll go into Q&A. We have some prepared questions that we'll be answering, and then feel free in the chats on YouTube or Facebook to be typing questions in as well. And we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. If you have a question for anybody in particular, just put their name in caps, and that way we'll make sure to ask Angela the question for Angela. So actually, Angela, on that note, I'll let you start, and everyone will give a quick kind of 30, 40-second introduction to themselves, and then we'll go into the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Yen. I graduated with my MBA from Texas McCombs in Austin. And prior to business school, I was working in nonprofit. It was an education organization. I started as a volunteer coordinator and kind of made my way up. I actually worked at the same organization for 7 years before I went to business school. I left the organization as director of communications, and what really sparked my interest in going for my MBA was pivoting to a brand new career. I wanted to go to a bigger company. I wanted to learn how marketing worked in the quote unquote business world. And so I graduated in 2019, and now I work at Dell Technologies. I am a product marketing manager on the PowerEdge server product marketing group. So good to be here.
Great. Thanks so much, Angela. Saloni.
Hi, everyone. I'm Saloni Shah. I am a Michigan Russ alum from 2017, so 3 years ago. Prior to my business school experience, I was a teacher through Teach for America in the Mississippi Delta. I taught technology, and I was a school administrator with a education nonprofit called Citizen Schools. So I spent 4 years of my career in education before business school. I decided to go to business school because I wanted to pivot or transition into a different career, because I wanted to learn about how the private sector tackles challenges and see what I can bring back to the public sector. So now I work at Microsoft. My first 2.5 years at Microsoft, I was in Microsoft HR, which was an incredible experience. And then I pivoted again, and I now work for M12, which is Microsoft's venture fund. And I work on the platform or business development side of venture, where I work with founders every day. So that's me.
Great. Fantastic journey, and one I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about soon. Emily, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Werner, and I was a Fuqua MBA grad in 2016. Prior to business school, I was a catering director in the hospitality industry for Chef Danielle Boulud in New York City. So pretty non-traditional background as far as business school goes. But now I work for Deloitte Consulting. And my ambition in going to business school was really to more deeply understand kind of what Saloni just said, how to apply business techniques to solve social problems. That was my primary goal. I concentrated in social entrepreneurship, but it became pretty clear that I was going to need a deeper business background beyond just what the MBA can offer before I'd be able to take that secondary career path. So I've heard some people describe if, an MBA is like your medical degree, working in consulting afterwards is like your residency. So I'm in my residency, and I specialize in customer strategy and experience for travel and hospitality companies, and still hope to someday pivot back to a more mission-driven career later in life.
Great, Emily, thanks so much. Well, as a former Deloitte consultant, we work with a ton of folks at Deloitte, and actually I did some work at Intercontinental Hotels Group and their global strategy team, so we should talk offline. Nishant, please go ahead.
Hi everyone, this is Nishant. I'm an INSEAD MBA grad. I graduated recently as part of the 2020 July class. Prior to MBA, I spent about 6 years in consulting, which included 3 years in technology consulting and about 3 years in management consulting. One of my motivations to do the MBA was to kind of explore potential career options outside consulting. And I would be joining a corporate role with DHL Consulting. So it's like an internal consulting team. So my MBA helped me. It has helped me move into a corporate role, and B, I'm also changing geography. So I worked for my 7 years for 6 years across Asia. So I'll also be transforming to a new geography and moving to Germany soon. Happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, Nishant. And then our second INSEAD alum, John.
Thanks, Scott. Hey, everyone. My name is John. I started my career out in New York City, actually, out doing management consulting. I was at Oliver Wyman, focused a lot of my time on retail and institutional banking type clients, so kind of the financial services sector. I went to INSEAD and graduated in 2017, so same as Saloni. I think for me, the main drivers of going to school were first to sort of take sort of a mental break in terms of kind of like a good time to sort of reflect and sort of think about what I wanted out of my kind of longer term career. But then also the international exposure aspect. So I managed to try to spend as much time abroad outside of the US as possible. Currently now I transitioned to tech. So I've been at LinkedIn for a little bit and then most recently joined Coinbase out in San Francisco.
Great. Well, thanks so much. So the first question we have here, and we'll kind of put them on the screen and then minimize them. Did you decide to change careers prior to getting an MBA or during the MBA process, and what led you to that decision? And I like leading with this question because as a personal MBA coach, we get a lot of folks that say, look, I think I want to make a change, but I'm not sure if I'm really comfortable doing that yet. And a lot of people change their minds once they're in school. So yeah, if anyone wants to start off, yeah, maybe Emily, I'll let you kind of begin as you start to think about it, since you definitely made a little bit about the change. When did you sort of decide that you would make that change?
Such a great question, Scott. So definitely I knew I was making a career change when I applied for the MBA, but you could have never told me that I was going to recruit for consulting when I was applying for business school. Even up until, my first few weeks, I was like, oh, all those people in the suits, no, that's not me. 2 weeks later, I was right there with them with a striped jacket, but nonetheless, I was there. And the way that it worked for me was, again, I really wanted to pursue a career in the social impact space, but it became apparent that, again, I just needed deeper business skills in order to be able to apply those to social issues in the way that I felt that I was going to want to be able to. So that's the pivot that I did make. And kind of once I made that early on in the first few weeks of the recruiting process, then I was pretty committed. So most of my changes happened in that first month or so of really getting exposed to all the opportunities once I was at Fuqua.
Great, thank you so much. Anyone else want to add in based on their own experiences?
Yeah, happy to jump in.
I can share. Go for it.
Oh, sorry. I think there may be a little bit lag. I'll be quick, but I think, for me, it was a little bit similar as well. I think I knew going in that I wanted to make a change. And I sort of had tech and sort of the financial sector in mind, just given my previous experience. But I think personally, I would have envisioned it a little bit further out. Had sort of all intentions to go back to my previous job after graduating. But I think the MBA process actually accelerated my thinking in a lot of different ways. So, through the folks that you interact with, the activities you participate outside of classes, even the internship, all of those things sort of kind of, put the fuel on the fire, so to speak. And then, by the time graduation comes, you're like, oh, I know it's time to make a change. Sorry, Saloni, go ahead.
No, that's great. I think there's a lag on my end. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I think I'm a little bit of an anomaly. I realized before even going to business school, if I didn't know exactly why I wanted to go, I just wouldn't be successful. So I did a lot of painful self-reflection the year before I went to business school, which helped me inform that I was going to make a career pivot out of education for a little while, similar to Emily. Like, I really want to learn from the private sector and see, I'm super curious about the intersection of public and private and what those two spaces can learn from each other. But the one thing that did change when I got on campus is I thought I was going to be a consultant. I was like, I'm going to be a consultant. That's the easiest way to learn a lot of things very quickly, and then pivot back into the public sector. And I realized quite quickly through recruiting early on that I am very, very mission driven, and I'm motivated by being a part of a very specific organization and mission. So I pivoted to only looking at internal HR programs before I was only looking at human capital consulting. And so then that really just came from talking to alum at the different companies and programs that I was interested in, both on the human capital consulting side and in the two sectors that I ended up actually recruiting for, which are the technology industry and the financial industry. So.
Great. Well, thanks so much, John and Saloni. Super helpful. Another question, which is sort of along the same lines, how did the MBA help you to make this change? Specifically, whether it's certain classes that you took or certain clubs that you joined. Nishant, maybe if you want to talk a little about your experience and how the MBA helped you.
Yep, sure. So I think my shift was more along the lines of an industry shift and a geographical shift. So I was a consultant before, but I was consulting for external clients, and I'll be moving to a role where I do consulting for an internal clients for a company. And the way I kind of made that shift was, so before going into the MBA, I actually did not even know such a profile existed. So I think it was over the course of interactions with alums and through company presentations that I came to know about this and got interested. And actually this specific role I actually got to know about through an alum. So I spoke to an alum who was working at DHL, got interested in what she was doing, and asked her, hey, what's the recruitment cycle like? When do you think you guys will be next recruiting? I would be interested. And so she kept that in mind, and a couple of months down the line, she reached out to me saying that, hey, we are looking for people. Are you interested? I can help you with the referral. So I think, and again, that's my story. A lot of my friends too have leveraged a lot through the alum network. So I think that network is something that really helps during an MBA to learn about the different kind of roles and potential opportunities out there, and B, get your first foot in the door in that sense.
Great. Thanks, Nishant. So Angela, is there anything else you want to add from the McCombs standpoint? Any other things that you feel like the program did for you that other folks would benefit from hearing about?
Yeah, definitely. So like Saloni and Emily, prior to business school, I was in education and at a smaller nonprofit at that. And I only had that one experience. And so I felt like the MBA was going to give me that chance and that exposure to different industries, different business leaders, different companies. And at McCombs, there's a lot of hands-on learning opportunities to get you there. Two things. One was the MBA Plus Micro Consulting Project Program. This is offered across different business schools, but that's what it's called at McCombs. You get to be on a team of 5 to 6 students, and you work directly with a company on a problem that they're trying to solve. And for me, I had a smaller nonprofit that nobody recognized on my resume. So this was a really great chance to show employers and signal to them that I was ready for this career switch. I got to do a project with Wells Fargo in the fall, and in the spring, I did a people analytics project with Whole Foods. And so it's just a great way to get that tangible hands-on experience and also kind of dip your feet in the water and see like, hey, is this something I really want? And the second experience is called the Marketing Fellows Program at McCombs. It's for a select group of about 20 students, for the most passionate marketing students, to get to work with today's CMOs to solve today's marketing problems. So every week we'd have a different company come in and present a mini case challenge of sorts. So it's definitely on the same lines of that hands-on tangible learning, but more in that functional realm. I wanted to learn more about marketing specifically. So it was really great to be able to do that.
So as far as things that maybe you could have done a bit differently, looking back in time, hindsight's always 20/20. Is there anything that you feel like, had you done this again, or if you were to do this again, you would have done a little bit differently as you're thinking about the career change? Emily, I don't know if anything comes to mind for you.
Oh, so many things. For me, very simply, I would have done it sooner. I was in my prior career for 9 years, and I just didn't have a lot of folks that I knew in my network that had gone to business school or pursued an MBA. So it didn't seem like something that made sense for me. And so I felt like all of the research that I was doing was very, I guess, a little bit impersonal. So I think I wish I had had a bit of a stronger network in advance, or maybe spent longer trying to look for folks and expand my network, going back to my undergrad network. And I did that a little bit, but I would say that I went in a little bit blind. And I think you can kind of see that in, showing up day one and thinking consulting's not for me. Well, it's because I knew nothing about it, right? So I feel very fortunate that I was able to pivot pretty quickly, and that they even accepted me to the program at all, to be totally honest, because I think it absolutely changed my career path in such a meaningful way. And the amount now that I understand that I didn't know before is kind of staggering. So I just wish that I had maybe dug a little bit deeper in research, started a little bit earlier in my career, but I'm pretty pleased where I am now. So it worked out.
Great. John, how about you? Anything else that you feel like you would have done differently, or if not, we'll go on to the next question, which is like, what's something specific that you learned from business school that's really helping you today? There's a lot of general knowledge and advice, but sometimes it's helpful for people to have something tangible to say, like, I learned how to do this, which is exactly helping me to do that today.
Yeah. I'll speak quickly to the first point around something I wish I had done differently. I think it's probably a bit more of a type of mindset adoption perspective, which is sort of embracing the notion of discarding optionality, if you will, in terms of career changes. I think one of I was in consulting for the majority of the early part of my career, and I think a classical stereotype is you don't know what you want to do, so you stay in consulting. And then I think it's a great notion, but at the same time, it becomes a bit of a handcuff type effect in which it holds you back from sort of pursuing other things that you generally do want to do. So it's sort of mentally shifting the model from optionality is a good thing to be sort of being pot committed to sort of the things that you want to do from a career perspective, and try not to always have your foot in another door instead of going all in. So, that's my personal take, but I realize that necessarily may not apply to everyone, where, options, I think, can also be a good thing in terms of keeping your, the things that you want to do open, especially during an MBA where there's a lot of room for exploration.
Great. Thank you. So, Saloni, does anything come to mind about your experience in the MBA that, there's something specific that you learned and that helps you day in and day out in your current job?
Yeah, 3 things, and I'll be very quick. One is MAP, which is Michigan's multidisciplinary action project, very similar to the project that someone else brought up earlier. It's a consulting project for an entire quarter, and I worked with a small coffee company in Peru and built their go-to-market strategy. And so that was very tangible in learning something completely new, working with a startup, working with a small company end to end. So you can see how that might help my job now, but really the skill I took away is learning agility, learning something very quickly and synthesizing it. The second is a class that I took called Big Data Analytics, and that helped me learn a little bit of SQL, learn how to use Tableau, and learn how to visualize data to tell a story. I use that all the time in my current job. And the third thing is influencing without authority. I was a club leader. I led our admitted students weekend and led big groups of peers through kind of school-based project or school leadership. And I use that muscle all the time in my job right now as I lead cross-functional teams, V teams, and support stakeholders kind of inside and outside of Microsoft. So yeah, totally. Very, very tangible things that I learned from business school that I use every day.
Fantastic. Angela or Nishant, anything come to mind that you want to add here?
I can jump in here. I took a design thinking class, and even though I'm not a designer, I feel like the concepts I learned in that class have really taught me to explore and solve problems by just using a more open-ended method. And so in design thinking, I think the typical view you see is a bunch of Post-it notes on the screen, and that might be, I said on the screen, but it's on the wall. But now that we're all on Zoom, it's on a screen, and I've learned how to adapt and use those concepts in this class and be able to kind of infuse that way of thinking, especially to a large company at Dell. To do that digitally, it's kind of this interesting like design thinking / marketing merge, and I really appreciate being able to get that skill set from school.
I can just jump in with my 2 cents. So I think I haven't started my full-time job yet, but I've been doing an internship, and which has involved, interacting with a lot of senior level stakeholders. And I think a couple of courses which I did in NCR, which focused more on the softer skills aspect. So one was called negotiations and one was called psychological issues in management. I think those kind of gave me a lot of, and allowed me to develop that side a bit more. The early part of my career was primarily focused on developing the harder skills. I think the softer skills aspect was something which I would say I did not expect that much to be focused on that much during the MBA, but I was able to delve on it quite deep over the course of the program, and really focus on developing that, which I think will get more and more important as we move forward in the career.
Great, Nishant. Thanks so much. And actually, sticking with you for a minute, I know we were talking earlier about your recent experience going through recruiting. So we might pass some of the COVID questions to you. Tell us a little bit about what it's like. I know a lot of our clients at Personal MBA Coach actually said, "Hey, it's easier now. There are fewer events to do. You can stay home. You don't have to travel so much." And so people are, in some ways looking at a little bit of a silver lining amid a very tough situation. What was your experience like, recruiting just kind of right in the middle of when everything was happening with COVID?
Yeah, well, see, to be honest, I think recruiting initially was a bit difficult because I recruited during March, April, which was kind of the most uncertain times, right? People did not know how long things would last. So, there were the recruiting plans. Most companies, there were companies which came to campus for presentation, but postponed their hiring plans and so on. So, if you compare with the normal year at NCR, the recruitment pace was a bit slow. But I think it picked up a bit more towards the second half of the year, around July, August. That's when, things became a bit more clarity in terms of how long the impact would last, which sectors would be less impacted and so on. And I think we graduates were also able to kind of calibrate that into our plans and focus on geographies which were less impacted, focus on industries which were less impacted, and take those calls accordingly, right? So I think that's something that we had to do over the time. So for example, even for myself, I was initially focused on Southeast Asia, but the economies that in Singapore and Malaysia were a bit more badly hit, I would say, especially for foreigners who wanted to recruit there, and therefore I kind of had to rethink my plans and focus on the Western Europe, which was at that point of time recovering around July, August in much better shape, and that's something that really helped me.
Now, was this something, sticking with this theme for a minute, Nishant, was this something that the school helped you to kind of navigate? Were you talking with alumni? How did you sort of figure out these different regions and which was doing better and which companies had more jobs and things like that? Who kind of helped you along your journey?
Yeah, so one was definitely the alumni. So I was speaking to alumni in my target companies in the target geography, and I was keeping a pulse on what's happening and how things are evolving. So that was one aspect that definitely helped. The second thing that helped was the schools. So each of us had a career coach assigned, and the career coaches are also people who keep a tab on what's happening on different regions, different industries, and the input from them were also helpful in kind of shaping those decisions.
Great. Thank you so much. So speaking of geography, here's a question about geography. Did geography play a role in school selection for your job post-MBA? We get a lot of clients that come to us and say, I want to work in San Francisco, and so I'm only interested in XYZ school. And so I pull up the career report and say, well, if you look at this school, they actually sent 31% of their people to the West Coast, which is the highest of any other region. So people really do move around, quite a lot. I see some nodding of heads here. So maybe Saloni, I'll let you start here, and then we'll kind of go around. I'm curious to hear from everybody actually on this one, how geography played a factor, if at all, in school selection.
Yeah, for me, geography actually played a big factor, but less about post-job placement and more about culture and fit. I really wanted to go to a school that the fit was great because I was coming from the social sector like Angela, and I wanted people to understand kind of my transferable skills in teaching and that for that perspective to be welcomed, but also to learn from tons of different people. And I also really wanted to go to a transplant school, which might sound kind of weird, but Ann Arbor, Michigan is almost everyone comes to Ann Arbor to go to school. So it creates this amazing community. So for geography did make a huge difference in where I selected. I didn't want to go to school in a big city like Chicago or New York. And fit was important. But what I will say to your point, job placement, I mean, we had 400 people in my graduating class. 59 of them ended up in Seattle. And I think even more ended up on the West Coast in San Francisco. So I think you really need to look at what companies are you interested in working for, where they're based, and do those companies or those organizations recruit at the schools that you're interested in. It should be less about, I have to be living in a place where I am living after school, in my opinion. So yeah, that's my perspective.
No, great point. And just to add in, so I studied at Wharton, as I mentioned before, which is probably not as much of a transplant city, but certainly most people were not from Philadelphia, and I kind of enjoyed that experience as well. There are pros and cons to large cities. John, I'll let you jump in next.
Yeah, speaking of transplants, I mean, I can only imagine so many folks hailing from Fontainebleau, France, where INSEAD is based. Singapore, there's a few more folks. But yeah, I think for me personally, it played a very heavy role, not necessarily in sort of post-MBA placement, but certainly in terms of what I wanted to get out of my MBA experience, which was international exposure, particularly in Western Europe and Southeast Asia, kind of the Greater China region. So for me, INSEAD was sort of like a very natural fit for that sort of path in terms of physically being in the region, and also sort of doing sort of the extracurricular type activities where I was doing my internships and where I was sort of like building out my network in those areas. I think post-MBA job placement wise, I wasn't particularly married to any sort of geography. I was okay with coming back to the US, but also exploring longer term opportunities out in Southeast Asia, actually. So I actually ended up coming back stateside. So for me, it ended up being okay, but it certainly was a kind of like top reason for me in terms of school selection.
Now, before I let everyone else continue, I actually want to stick with you for a second, John, because a question came to my mind that a lot of applicants often ask when thinking about schools abroad. How easy was it for you to come back from a recruiting standpoint?
Yeah, it's a great question, Scott. I think it varies case by case, and I think it really has to do with kind of what you do in school to sort of demonstrate what the ultimate thing you're trying to do after graduation. For me, I upon graduation actually went back to my consulting firm, so the transition was actually fairly seamless and straightforward. So it wasn't too much, but for folks that were returning back to their geographies, I think it had to deal with the sort of networks that you're trying to personally build out off the side during recruiting. So it's like, when you were speaking to recruiters at, let's say, a consulting firm, are you speaking to the ones that are based in San Francisco or New York versus the ones that are out in Dubai? And same things with even smaller companies or even in tech. So are you, honing and building in sort of the industry or market knowledge that's most relevant from like a US perspective or like a European perspective or like an Asian perspective? So I think there's also a part and parcel of kind of like what you do during the actual schooling period. Great.
Nishant, how about for you? How did geography play a factor for you, if at all?
Yeah, so geography was kind of one of the top reasons in terms of my school selection. So I was very clear that I wanted to work preferably in Asia Pacific. If not, the second option for me was Western Europe or the Middle East. And considering keeping those options in mind, I think for me, I was only considering schools in Europe because I felt that US schools, the network and the kind of job opportunities you would get would primarily be focused more on the US, whereas schools like INSEAD or London Business School, etc., would have more of an influence if you're looking, more of a network if you're looking for something in let's say Western Europe or Asia Pacific. So geography was definitely one of the top parameters that I considered while choosing my school.
Angela, how about for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think the question of geography is twofold. One is choosing the location of your school, and two, thinking about the career you want afterwards. I agree with most of our panelists here that I don't think it's one and the same. For me, I grew up in SoCal my whole life, and I really wanted to move to a different state and just get that challenge. But with that career in the back of my mind, thinking, okay, like, could I live in that city afterwards? If I'm going to move to the city for 2 years, is that someplace I'd like to live? And that was a factor, but not the deciding factor. So for me, Austin was on that list, and I ended up falling in love with the city and staying here after graduation. But I do think that, what, like others have said, what you do in school really plays a role in where you end up afterwards. And having that mindset up front is super important. If you know you want to be specifically in a location, then there's XYZ things that you need to do while you're in school to get there. But if you're a little bit more open-minded with where you're going, then I think choosing based on the flexibility of like where you end up for school, then it doesn't make that much of a difference depending on what your goals, personal goals are.
So Emily, I'll let you round this out, and it's an interesting panel because nobody studied in a very, very large major metropolitan city, let's say. So it's a good panel to answer this question.
Yeah, similar to what some of the other panelists have said. For me at the time, it was a very personal decision. I'd been in New York City for 9 years, and I was debating either staying in New York City or going to Fuqua. And for me, it was a choice to leave what had become my home and my network of friends, and I had family close by, to just completely immerse myself in that experience. I think very similar to the Ann Arbor reference. Not a ton of people are from Durham, North Carolina. A lot of my classmates, though, similar to Angela, did end up staying and falling in love with kind of that part of the country. But for me, I knew I was going to come back to New York, so it was a nice chance to leave New York City for a few years, get a little bit more space, learn how to drive again, and now I'm back in New York.
So, question about career transitioning after a certain number of years in an industry, and Emily, certainly you could answer this as could others. How much do organizations look at prior experience? How difficult is this? And maybe I'll add an extra layer to make it a bit easier. How much does the industry impact this question? Meaning, if you're going to go into consulting, consultants hire people from a lot of different backgrounds. Did this factor into any of your sort of career decisions as you're going through recruiting?
For me personally, it definitely did. I think at first coming in and having this unusual background, working for a chef as a catering director and trying to recruit for consulting, for a while it felt like a deficit in my mind. When I looked at my peers and my classmates who had a background in marketing or previous, boutique consulting, that's instantly understandable and recognizable to a consulting recruiter. But what I finally came to realize is that my unique background actually made me stand out, and people remembered who I was because it was unique. And then once I joined Deloitte, I actually was able to leverage that background and work my way into what at the time was a really niche part of the company, specializing in transportation, hospitality, and travel. And was in the last 4 years, I've really been able to help it grow. We're 3 times bigger than we were when I started 4 years ago, which is really exciting. So I finally was able to see that unique part of my background as an asset instead of a detriment. So I would just say that it's all about finding your personal brand value and brand story, and being able to help that propel you into whatever's next.
So does a shorter program, whether this is INSEAD, so clearly the INSEAD folks can answer this, and anyone else can feel free to jump in as well, does that impact the chances of making a career pivot, having the internship or not having the internship? I often get this question asked, and I'll tell you my answer first, and then I'll let you all answer. Internships are certainly helpful for making a transition, gives you the chance to try something new, but I see a lot of people getting full-time jobs that don't have internships, and INSEAD, one option has the internship, one option does not. How does that sort of factor into everything?
Yeah, happy to lead here. And so my take is that it doesn't necessarily act as a barrier, but it does give you less time to experiment. So that's sort of my main takeaway, in the sense that the pivoting, all the tools for for necessary to sort of make that career pivot, and all the opportunities are there. And if anything, I think some of them are quite interesting given the sort of international exposure of the school and the alumni network. But what is different is the sort of time to sort of play around with different ideas. And so I actually personally went back to consulting right after school, but from my recollection of sort of other classmates and sort of their experiences, I think it was a function of if you sort of go in knowing sort of the directional area that you want, it's actually a fairly decent outcome in terms of how you sort of progress along there. It just gives you a little bit less flexibility in sort of making a pivot within a pivot, if that makes sense. Nishant, I don't know if that experience resonates with you. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, and just to add, I think though INSEAD by design is a shorter program, I think there are ample opportunities to kind of explore different options. So one of the things that INSEAD offers is an opportunity to do an industry project where you kind of get to work with a company hands-on to explore a new sector, for instance. So I kind of did that. I wanted to explore the VC space, and I did a project with a venture capital firm based in Germany to get an idea of how the work is like and what it entails. And the other thing that quite a few people do from INSEAD again is, though the program might not have an internship, like for my batch, the J class does not have an internship. I did a pre-MBA internship. There are people who do a post-MBA internship as well to kind of explore those new avenues. And again, if you want to do a pivot, and if someone is, if you're very clear in your mind in terms of what from where you want to pivot to where, you can always, start leveraging those networks and start having those conversations right from the start of the career. I mean, 10 months, though it's shorter than the other MBA programs, is still a pretty long time to kind of, really get deep into something if you know beforehand that that's something you want to dip your hands into.
Great. Well, Nishant, thank you so much. Super helpful. Thinking about transitionings, careers, and things like that. Often the alumni network can help with transitions, whether it's when you're in school or when you're out of school. And so there's a question from the web, which I'm not posting because I'll sort of change it a little bit. How has the alumni network helped you either while getting a job in school or after school? And how close do you feel like you are to the school now than when you were a student? Angela, I don't know if you want to start off here.
Sure. Yeah. I think looking at the school's alumni network is a huge part of the decision in applying to business school. For me, it was great. I'm sure everyone has similar experiences across the board, but it's just being able to reach out to an alum and set up a coffee chat, like that was so helpful in so many different companies that I came across in my research. That was awesome. And as part of school, I was in the McCombs ambassador committee to help answer admissions questions and things like that. And so it was just nice. It's just nice to be able to pay it forward. You work so hard to get into business school. So when you're in school, to be able to do that. And as an alum, just to be a part of that network, it's so important because we lift each other up in that way. And so even at Dell, where I'm at now with over 100,000 employees, we have a special McCombs Microsoft Teams group, and we try to do a Zoom once a month. And so it's important to stay connected, and there's many different ways to do that. And so I find it really helpful.
Saloni, any other thoughts from your experience?
Yeah, I'm super connected still, but the alumni network is truly, as Angela said, how I got my job. So at Microsoft, I found out about the HR rotational program through an alum. The MBA twos really run our peer coaching for helping you get a job, and I think that a lot of schools are like that. So I got trained on how to talk about my transferable skills and how to talk about a career transformation by alumni and second years who then were alumni. And my current job actually right now in venture, pivoting from HR to venture is very strange. And I'm one of the reasons I think I got the first call was because my manager is a Michigan alum. So the Michigan Alum Network has been an amazing kind of access and opportunity network for me. And I'm super involved in school. I mean, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I helped run the Admitted Students Weekend called Go Blue Rendezvous, which means I work pretty closely with the admissions team. I was an interviewer, and they tap me now for these kinds of panels all the time, and I'm more than happy to do it because I love giving back, because I wouldn't have been where I am now without Michigan alums. So yeah.
Great. Anyone else have anything else to add here? If not, we'll jump on to the next.
Yep, I think I can just quickly quip in with a couple of words. So I think personally, the INSEAD alumni base has been a big help for me. I mean, I did a pre-MBA internship which was through an INSEAD alum. My job, which I will be joining soon, is through the INSEAD alumni network. And because I had some time before joining my job, I decided to do an internship, which was again through the INSEAD alumni network. So the alumni network has definitely been very useful. And again, considering the economic scenario and the COVID impact on the job market and so on, when the reality hit us around April, May, I think the alumni network really came forward. There was a business projects portal created where alumni posted their job openings, etc. There were panels where alumni who graduated during the financial crisis actually came on board in panels and spoke about their experiences and shared their perspectives on how we should deal with the situation, and also give tips on how to keep your mental health stable in this scenario. So the alumni network has definitely been a very valuable resource in multiple fronts.
Great. Well, Nishan, thanks so much. So Emily, a question for you. Any advice that you would give folks who are not sure about the investment in the MBA? They're kind of in their career, whether it's they're 35 years old and have been working for a while, or they're making a decent salary. How do you advise people on weighing the pros and cons of leaving and going to school during some uncertain times, as you're thinking about the daunting task of maybe switching your career?
Yeah, I think there's obviously a ton of personal factors that will go into this. If you're supporting a family or not, I think those obviously make a huge difference. But at least from my perspective, the ability to take a pause in your career, where at my job at the time, and I'm sure we've all felt this way, I just felt like I was constantly giving. And to be able to take a pause and to take 2 full years or near about that to actually reflect on myself and to work on my own personal and professional development, starting with the business school application process, was such a unique experience and one that I deeply needed at the time. And so I think, that kind of quarter life crisis, if you will, but it was such a valuable opportunity for me in terms of personal self-reflection and learning and development over those 2 years. Obviously, the network also, as all the other panelists have just spoken to. But I think one more point from my perspective is the opportunities that the MBA provides beyond and outside of the classroom. Thinking about the internship program, a lot of people choose to do something that is a personal passion, either before or after. So for me personally, when I was graduating and I was lucky enough to have a Deloitte offer waiting for me, I thought, I'm never going to have an opportunity again where I can take 6 months, have an offer waiting for me, and go do something that I'm really passionate about. So I worked with a nonprofit organization in Ghana focused on women's health for about 5 months before starting my career with Deloitte. And that's just something that, I felt I would never really have the opportunity to do again in quite the same way. So I think just the space that the MBA affords you in all of those aspects is a really unique time. And that's just for me personally, but it certainly is a big investment, both in terms of time and money.
So actually piggybacking on that, Emily, so either John or Saloni, if one of you want to jump in here, think about, things that, and maybe Saloni might be a little bit more kind of targeted for you. Think about things that you thought about doing sort of before you started your job to prepare yourself, and things that you actually did. And Was there anything really specific that you think back and you consider, okay, so now given where we are now and everybody is remote and what opportunities present themselves with, now if I were sort of going through this whole process today, like here's what I would be doing. I know we asked a version of this question earlier, but if there's anything else that comes to mind, whether it's like an online course or just, relaxing or doing a remote wine tasting.
Yeah, yeah. I get this preparation question a lot. And what I tell people, usually I get it after people have applied. And I say, if you've applied and you know where you're going, what you should do to prepare is chill. Like take a wine tasting class. Like that's what you should do. However, if you are preparing yourself to apply, I would say like the number one thing I did was like self-reflection and really understanding what kind of problem I wanted to solve in the world. And I always realize there are a million ways to get there, but if you start to write down like, what do I want to solve? What are the ways I think I can get there? That self-reflection helps with your essays. It helps with your research when you're thinking about where you want to go. So that takes me to the next thing. Like I would do research, right? Like I would ask the hard questions, like what is the school doing differently because of COVID, because of the virtual world? How supportive has the career office been with the virtual world? Are the alumni answering questions in the virtual world? Like ask those really tough questions when you're doing the research. Is your job acceptance rate down? Right? Like how that's indicative of how just the economy, but also how much the school is hustling to make sure that students get jobs afterwards. So I would ask the tough questions in your research. And with research, one of the big data points, I actually wrote one of my essays about it was how many people are responding to your emails. Right? Like at Fuqua and at a few other schools, like every alum I reached out to on LinkedIn or on email responded, but there were other schools that I will not mention that the alums didn't respond ever. So that was like a signal for me. I was like, that's not the kind of community I want to enter. So I would say self-reflection, research with asking the tough questions that you know are important to you. For example, last thing I'll say is, community and networking was a big part of my MBA experience. I'm sitting in Chicago right now. I don't live in Chicago. I'm at one of my best friends' places from grad school. So asking like, what are you doing to build community in the virtual world would be a really important question for me. So think about what's important to you and make sure you're asking the questions through your research.
Great. Thanks so much. So this has been super, super helpful. As we get close to kind of closing out, I'll just say to everyone, take the time, right? Think about what makes sense. I know a lot of people are asking questions around timing and what's reasonable. Is now the right time? This is a longer term investment in yourself and your career. And we usually, that's funny. That reminds me of a story of someone who recorded a video with a cat walking across the screen. And they ended up getting accepted to the school anyway. So hello, welcome. So, take the time, think about it, right? You're investing in yourself, you're investing in your future. If you have any questions or, you want advice, reach out to me, Scott at personalmbacoach.com. Would be happy to answer. And then I'll let each of our panelists give some final closing words, maybe 30 seconds or so each. So Angela, maybe you or your cat, you can start off.
Yes. Hi, everyone. You got to meet Willie, my cat. My top advice, I think some of the fellow panelists said it so well. I think some of us come into the MBA wanting a new career and wanting a switch, and we think we come from a non-traditional background. But the realistic thing is everyone in business school comes from a different background. And so I think that's like one thing that I learned is to own your experience, and that everyone is, you have consulting experience, you have banking experience, you have accounting experience, you have education experience. And I felt like my experience was so different from others. But honestly, that's why you're there. That's why you're there to own that experience and to bring that part of you into this next phase of your life. And so really do that self-reflection that we talked about earlier. I think that is so key to understanding where you want to go and where this MBA is going to take you.
Fantastic. Saloni, any other closing words from you?
I guess I would say it's a stressful process, so make sure you're taking care of yourself through it as you're thinking about applying. And the last thing I'll say is, I think a lot of people talked about career transformation in the chat, and I am maybe a radical person in this space. I think you can pivot a million times. Transferable skills are key. There are transferable skills for every job. You can mostly do almost anything if you really think about it, other than a few technical things or becoming a doctor. So I would say if you're thinking about a career transformation, reflect on your transferable skills, because you absolutely have them no matter what background you're coming from, and just go after what you want.
Great, thank you so much. John.
Yeah, maybe some closing thoughts around, I think we've been talking a lot about kind of the professional and career impact of an MBA. I think maybe I'll leave some parting words around the kind of social and personal impact of it, which I think is fairly significant for a lot of folks. At the end of the day, this is like the 1 or 2 years where you'll get to spend a lot of time with classmates that, you may not intersect from a professional network standpoint, but certainly from a personal network standpoint. These are folks that you'll travel with, you'll attend their weddings, you'll go to their kids' birthdays and things like that. So these are kind of like lifelong relationships that I would really encourage people to sort of think and input into their sort of mental calculus of how they sort of think about an MBA decision.
Fantastic. Nishant, how about some thoughts from you?
Sure. I think Angela, Saloni, and John have touched most of the important ones. I think I'll just add one bit to it. When you're thinking about career transformation, and when you're thinking of applying, one of the questions that you'll probably be grappling with is, will school A or will school B help me make that pivot or make that transformation? And what I would advise is, speak to alums as much as possible, reach out to people, try to search for people who have successfully made that transition, and try and learn about how they were able to do that, and see where you stand and what kind of skill sets you bring to the table, and how you could project yourself to be a suitable candidate for that sort of a transformation.
Thanks so much, Nishant. And Emily, any closing thoughts from you?
Sure. Just building on a little bit what I said before, and also Salone's advice of, kind of chilling and taking a wine class. I would think about the experience holistically, right? The MBA program in and of itself is a phenomenal experience, phenomenal opportunity, but it is also 2 years of your life. So what are you passionate about, right? Like, take those opportunities if you are going to take time off work to make the transitions, to explore other things that you're passionate about. Like my experience, if it's, doing something with a nonprofit, if it's learning a new language, running that marathon, I think it's an amazing time in your life to think about your life holistically, because you have the rest of your life to work after your MBA. Trust me.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate all the time. Thank you, everyone who's watching, for all the great questions. And please tune in for other fantastic events for the rest of today and the rest of the next couple weeks with GMAT Club. Best of luck, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.